If you want to keep being my wife, Eleanor, you need to tell everyone at that funeral that I come, before your mother." My husband's words echoed through the church speakers while my mother's casket sat 6 feet away. For a moment I froze. I looked at the empty pew where Mark should have been. He had refused to attend my mother's funeral, yet he had found a way to put himself at the center of it. Outside, pickup trucks lined the church parking lot, while the ceiling fan clicked above us. My father stood beside me. My sister Linda stared down. Nobody knew what to say. "Mark," I whispered, "today is about my mother, and I'm your husband," he snapped through the speaker. "You keep choosing your family over me. I want you to say, right now, that I come first." I looked at my mother's photograph beside the casket. She was smiling in that picture, sitting on our old porch swing with a glass of sweet tea. 3 weeks earlier, she had sat in that same chair and given me a warning I had barely understood. "Ellie, pay attention to what people do when they think you're too tired to notice." At the time, I thought she was talking about the bookkeeping office she had owned for nearly 30 years. I never imagined she was talking about my husband. My father reached for the microphone. "Son," he said calmly, "this is neither the time nor the place." Mark's voice hardened. "You stay out of my marriage." Dad didn't argue. He simply turned to me. "Sweetheart, you don't have to answer him." Something in those words steadied me. I ended the call. The room remained silent until Mrs. Collins, my mother's longtime neighbor, came close and touched my arm. Her eyes moved toward the casket. "Your mother was worried," she whispered. I stared at her. "Worried about what?" She hesitated, then glanced at my father. "About Mark." My heart sank. I wanted to dismiss it. But suddenly several things came back to me. Missing papers from my mother's office, conversations that stopped whenever I entered the room, and Mark insisting he could handle my mother's business affairs. I had let every one of those things pass. Standing beside her casket, I finally understood that my mother had been trying to warn me, and I had not been listening carefully. After the funeral, I drove home alone, but my mother's warning followed me way down the county road. Mark's truck wasn't in the driveway. I was relieved. For the first time, I could think without hearing his voice telling me I was overreacting. My mother had owned a small bookkeeping office downtown for almost 30 years. It was nothing fancy, just 2 desks, an old copier, a humming coffee maker, and a front window overlooking Main Street. Mark had started helping her after his construction business began struggling. He told me he was only doing paperwork to make things easier for her. I believed him. Then small things began disappearing. A bank statement couldn't be found. A property tax receipt was missing. A folder containing insurance papers vanished from my mother's desk. Whenever I asked Mark about them, he always had an answer. "Your mother probably misplaced it." I accepted that explanation more times than I care to admit. Then, 2 months before her death, I stopped at the office without calling first. Mark was standing behind my mother's desk with an open folder in front of him. The moment he saw me, he closed it. "What are you working on?" I asked. "Just organizing some paperwork." His answer came too quickly. I looked at the folder, but he had already tucked it beneath several papers. I didn't argue. My mother had taught me that you learn more by watching than by accusing. A week later, she called me and asked a strange question. "Has Mark ever talked to you about the office building?" "No," I said. There was a long silence. "All right," she answered. "I'll handle it." Her voice sounded different, careful, almost frightened. 3 days later, I found an envelope inside her old desk drawer with my name written across the front. Inside was a photocopy of a property transfer document. According to the paper, my mother had transferred partial ownership of her office building to Mark. The date was 6 months earlier. I stared at the signature. It looked like hers, but I remembered how badly her eyesight had deteriorated by then. She needed a magnifying glass to read mail. I slipped the copy into my purse and took it home. I didn't confront Mark. Instead, I checked my mother's business records. That was when I found the first unexplained withdrawal from her account. Then I found another. I sat at my mother's kitchen table that night with her old records spread in front of me, listening to the refrigerator hum while rain tapped against the windows. I found 3 withdrawals from her business account that I couldn't explain. Then I found payments to a company connected to Mark. The amounts were not huge by themselves, but together they told a different story. I wasn't born yesterday, but I also wasn't ready to believe my husband had stolen from my mother. I decided to verify everything before making one accusation. The next morning, I called my mother's attorney and asked whether he could review the property document. He told me to bring every record I had. His office smelled of old paper and coffee, and he studied the document without saying much. Finally, he looked at me. "Did your mother tell you she signed this?" "No." "Did you see her sign it?" "No." He folded his hands. "Then don't confront anyone yet. Find out what you can." I followed his advice. Over the next several days, I copied bank statements, property records, receipts, and old emails. I kept the originals where nobody could reach them. Then, while searching through my mother's bedroom, I noticed an old family photo album pushed farther back than usual. Something behind it caught my attention. It was another envelope. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter. "Ellie," it began, "if you're reading this, something happened that I hoped I could prevent." She explained that she had become suspicious of Mark months earlier. She had discovered money leaving her business account and had questioned him about it. He told her the money was temporary and would be returned. It wasn't. She also wrote that Mark had been pressuring her to transfer ownership of the building. My mother had refused because she didn't trust his intentions. Then she explained why she hadn't told me. She was afraid I would confront him and destroy my marriage while she was still alive. The final paragraph made me stop breathing for a moment. "If Mark ever asks you to choose between him and me, don't let his anger frighten you. He knows what he has done." Beneath those words, she added one final sentence. "Your father has the rest." I immediately reached for my phone. But before I could call him, it rang. Dad was already calling me. My father arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a worn manila envelope. He placed it on my kitchen table but didn't sit down. "Your mother told me to keep this until you needed it," he said. "Why didn't you give it to me at the funeral?" Dad sighed. "Because she wanted you to grieve before you had to fight." Inside were copies of bank statements, property records, receipts, and a letter from my mother's attorney. I read every page slowly. The records showed repeated transfers from my mother's business account into Mark's company. Then I found a note written by my mother beside one withdrawal. "Mark says this will be repaid. It never was." Then I found the document that mattered most. It was a sworn statement from the notary whose name appeared on the property transfer. She stated that she had never witnessed my mother's signature and had never notarized the document. Someone had used her notary seal without permission. I looked at Dad. So the transfer was never valid. "That's what the attorney believes," he said. "But don't accuse Mark yourself. Let the evidence do the talking." I called the attorney immediately. He told me to bring everything to his office and not contact Mark until the papers were reviewed. That evening, Mark called anyway. His voice sounded controlled, but I could hear something underneath it. "Your father is filling your head with nonsense." I said nothing. "Those papers don't mean what you think they mean." I stayed quiet. "Eleanor, I'm your husband. You should trust me." I looked at my mother's letter beside the phone. For 29 years, I had trusted him without asking enough questions. "Did you take money from my mother's account?" I asked. The silence lasted several seconds. "You don't understand the situation." That was answer enough. "And did you try to take her building?" I asked. He became angry. "She promised it to me." "Then why is the notary saying she never signed the transfer?" Mark stopped talking. I could hear his breathing. I thought about his demand at the funeral. He had wanted me to choose him before I knew the truth. Now I understood why. I closed the folder and said, "You asked me to choose between you and my mother. I choose the truth." Then I hung up and sat alone in my mother's kitchen, realizing the man I had trusted for 29 years might have been planning this for months. The next morning, I met my mother's attorney at the courthouse. I brought every document I had copied, along with the original letter from my mother. He reviewed everything and told me something I needed to hear. I didn't have to destroy Mark. I only had to tell the truth and let the evidence speak. The legal process took months. There were meetings, questions, bank records, property filings, and long afternoons in an attorney's office that smelled of paper. Mark's attorney argued that my mother had willingly transferred the building, but the notary's sworn statement proved otherwise. My mother's own notes showed she had questioned the withdrawals before she died. The bank records showed money had moved from her business account into Mark's company. One by one, the pieces fit together. The court eventually ruled that the property transfer was invalid. Mark had no ownership claim to my mother's building, and he was ordered to repay the money taken from her business. There was no shouting in the courtroom, no dramatic revenge, just documents, testimony, and consequences. Mark's construction business suffered after the truth became known. People around town learned what he had done, and slowly, his invitations stopped coming. Folks notice more than people think. Nobody needed me to tell them what kind of man he had become. His choices had already spoken for him. As for me, I kept my mother's bookkeeping office. Every morning, I unlocked the same door she had opened for nearly 30 years. I kept her desk, her family photographs, and the coffee maker that still hummed louder than it brewed. Sometimes after closing, I sat on the porch swing and listened to crickets settling into the grass. I thought about the funeral and the terrible demand Mark had made while my mother's casket stood nearby. I understood then why my mother had warned me to watch what people did when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Mark had shown me exactly who he was. My mother had shown me how to survive it. I never got my marriage back, but I got something I had nearly surrendered without realizing it: my dignity. I learned that love does not require obedience, and loyalty does not mean ignoring the truth. My mother was gone, but her lesson stayed with me. When someone asks you to choose between love and your dignity, choose the truth.